So let's start off with number 1, the I have a buyer sales appointment. I call it the lie that breaks trust. Because if they see that you really don't have a buyer, it's really, really shaky ground, and the conversation, the relationship is going to crumble and you're going to have nothing to stand on. Now, I've done this. What I've done is I had a buyer, and I took my buyer and I said, okay, I have all these houses that I'm going to see if they're willing to sell or if they're a FSBO. So I would go to FSBOs, mail a letter, show up, tell them I have a buyer, and I was so surprised how resistant they were until they saw the buyer. But it still took me so long to build enough trust and rapport after saying I have a buyer for them even to let me bring my buyer. Here's the thing. They had just been beat up by a slew of agents with the same one-liner, and those agents did not have a buyer. So keep that in mind. If you really do have a buyer, make sure you maybe describe the buyer, tell a story about the buyer to make them see that your buyer is real. Then bring the buyer in and show the home. Now, another thing, I've seen some agents do this and get listings, and then the listing doesn't sell because there's no trust and rapport. They say they have a buyer and they really don't. I call it like trying to get in bed with a home seller, not build a true relationship. It's going to crumble, and if it doesn't crumble before you get the listing, many times it crumbles during the listing, after the listing. You just wasted 6 months on a home that wouldn't sell because they didn't trust you. Therefore, they would not bring the price down. Again, I've talked to many home sellers that have so much resentment for realtors that do this. FSBOs, they'll have a list of realtors and they'll be gauging them because many FSBOs will list FSBO to interview agents. So as agents show up, they see who has value and who has values, their character. How can they be trusted? And many home sellers had a list, and FSBOs, they would have a list and they would say, these are the agents that lied to us, that didn't give us what we wanted, and these are the agents we want to talk to, so therefore, we're going to interview these agents. So just keep that in mind if you're going to use this approach. With FSBOs, we need to build relationships. They're different than expireds. They're going to go longer before they list, but 87% of them will list, and so therefore, it's worth it for us as agents to nurture these relationships, cultivate them into a listing. If another agent brings that line of, I have a buyer, here's what you can bring up to the home seller. Home seller, did you know that when someone brings a buyer to your house, they have a fiduciary agreement, a legal requirement to get the best offer for their buyer and to only do what's in the interest of their buyer. So therefore, they're not representing you, they're representing their buyer. And this can be a really scary place to be in if they're trying to negotiate you down and trying to get you to sign something that is not in your best interest. So that's something that we can bring up to FSBOs when they say, you know what, this guy here, he already has a buyer, so I might list with him. I would encourage you to talk to the FSBO and say, has he brought his buyer here? And then bring up the fiduciary agreement. That can be something that you can say, you know what? Let me represent you, and then I will go talk to him, have him bring his buyer, and that way I can make sure you, Mr. Seller, get the most amount of money and get the representation that you need to sell your home. Let me share this quick video with you from Rick from an interview we just did.
And so what you need to do is develop the dialogue to talk to those people and say, okay, let me see if there's something that we can work out and make this beneficial for both of us. Because they know you're there to make a commission. So if they say, why are you here? My objective is the same as yours, to sell your home and for us to both get paid. There's nothing wrong with telling them that because they know that's what you want to do. Just be honest with them and don't lead them into believing you've got a buyer if you don't. That's a big one. I A lot of, if you call it for sale by owner and you or say, I'm interested in coming over and looking at your house. If you have a buyer, that's one thing. But if they say, well, why do you have a buyer? Don't tell them that you've got a buyer. If you don't, they can read right through that. And once again, you lose trust. Okay? So you say, you know what? I don't really have a buyer today. However, I've been doing this for a while and I pick up new clients on a regular basis. I'd love to see your home. There's not a lot of inventory in your neighborhood and it looks like a really nice home. Can I come over and take a look at it? And if you just approach it like that, typically my experience has been that they're willing to let me come over.
As you see there, Rick has some great points. Be upfront, come across as trustworthy in your delivery. If you're squirreling around, beating around the bush, consciously or subconsciously, as humans, we pick up on this stuff and it does not make us feel comfortable. So I hope that helps you kind of work your way around this whole I have a buyer thing. If you're doing it, great. Make sure you have a buyer. If other agents are doing it and trying to use it against you for a FSBO, bring up what we talked about, and so you can set yourself apart as trustworthy, at the same time shedding light on the lie that the other agents are using.